Hello, my friends. I just wanted to drop some special bonus episodes into the feed that you probably have not heard unless you are a part or an early part of the Patreon for the Life Shift podcast. If you don't know, I do have a Patreon. It currently only has two tiers. One is a $3 a month tier just to support what I'm doing, helps cover production costs. And then there's a $5 tier, which will get you episodes early and just the, I guess, warm fuzzies for helping me out with the Life Shift podcast. But I used to have other tiers where people were so generous and were offering additional money each month to get bonus episodes and possible winnings of t-shirts and all sorts of things. And then I realized a couple months ago that I wasn't able to deliver what I wanted to, especially for those of you that were giving me the extra money. So right now we're just kind of doing the early episodes. You'll always get those. So if you want to support the Life Shift podcast, please jump over to patreon.com/the Life Shift podcast, and you can find that information there. But I come on here because I want to share a series of these bonus episodes that I did early on in the Patreon journey. There are like 20 plus episodes in which I had bonus recordings with previous guests. So I would go back and we would have a conversation about the experience of sharing their story on the Life Shift podcast, catch up on anything. And I think these are super important. And I know most of them did not see the light of day from outside of the Patreon. So I'm going to be dropping these episodes. Whatever you're listening to now is another episode. So I'm going to use the same intro for all of them. But here is one of the bonus episodes with a former guest from the Life Shift podcast. And if you like this, let me know because I'm thinking of bringing some of this back and talking to previous guests as I go into year 4. So enjoy this bonus episode that was once released on the Patreon feed. I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that have changed lives forever. I am here with a longtime friend, Becca. Hey, Becca.
Hey.
Thank you for coming back and doing this episode, but thank you for sharing your story way back when. That was episode 16, but we just said this before we started recording that we recorded that in April of 2022. I don't know what years are anymore.
Does anyone? I admire the person that knows.
And what I remember from your story, I mean, I guess what stuck out the most about your story to me, and this maybe wasn't what you went in initially kind of thinking this is the moment that's going to stand out, but that's how these stories kind of work for me. But that moment in, I think maybe like first grade, in which your teacher, when you were so excited about your shoes and your teacher kind of introduced the idea, not on purpose, not with any kind of bad act in it, but introduce the idea of shame into your life. And that really stuck out to me in your story. But I'm wondering if anything particular about your story after saying it stuck out with you, like, oh, wow, I didn't really put those pieces together.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting question. I tend to be a fairly self-reflective person. I like to journal. I like to reflect. I like to, try to make meaning of things. I think that anytime you have the gift of having someone reflect back to you what you're working through or even the ways that you're working through it or what they're hearing. I mean, I think that for me, just using that moment as an example, clearly it was profound because I remember it all these years later. But I think I always just thought of it as that was the first time I realized I'm poor and maybe that's not awesome. Right. I just and so I think I always kind of thought of it in that way. And our conversation that day was oh, but how do I do that to other people as an educator? Do I do that, all the sorts of ways. I mean, I think even in that moment when I was externally processing, just being so mindful about the ways that you can be. And I say it all the time with teams that I manage or that I'm facilitating or even classes or whatever, this notion of assume best intentions, but also attend to impact. yes, things are going to go better if you can like hear what someone says, maybe not love it, but like be like, but I know you and I love you and I trust you. So like I want to assume that you have good intentions, but also I need to name the impact that had and like we need to address that, right? And so I think that it was like a moment where I was like, oh, these things are converging, like something I espouse philosophically in practice. That was a moment that probably shaped feeling pretty strongly about that, because I feel like if people just stop with assume good intentions, it's like it doesn't take us quite far enough, because like even if people have good intentions, right, like they can have that impact. And so I think it's just like a reminder of so many of the things that we carry with us are seeded so early on, which isn't terrifying at all when you have like an almost 4-year old and you're like, oh God,
What am I doing?
everything I say could be planting some sort of seed.
Oh, I've been talking to people a lot lately on some of these episodes about a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it kind of makes me think of that, in which there are these moments that we are planted kind of in our subconscious and our bodies keeping track of them. And they're, and you're, oh, I didn't realize how all the things, because the way that you work with your teams and your people could very well stem from some of those subconscious experiences as a child. And so it's very interesting to have these conversations the deeper I get into it, because I think today I'm recording episode 54. And so, there's a lot of commonalities of these people kind of unwrapping some of these moments that kind of sat in our subconscious for so long. And we're like, oh, I didn't realize how that actually connected to what I'm doing today.
What I do. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Exactly. One of my favorite parts about this show, and I don't know if this is going to sound selfish, but one of my favorite parts is listening to the episode when it comes out. Because usually, like I said, we recorded your episode in April, and then it didn't release until the end of June for your birthday. Somehow that worked out exactly on as it should have. And I was wondering, when you listened to it, was there anything that like stood out to you? Like, oh, I didn't even realize that I said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me it was more like like a more of like a meta level reflection of like the ways we like almost like gatekeep the ways that we talk about things, right? It's like, okay, I feel like I've learned over my life, like, okay, I need to talk about like the painful things in a way that feels less painful. Like to, like to go to myself, probably mostly self-preservation, but also like, I think I've come up against the limits of like what the people around me and I'm like just sensitive to as, someone who's just always been kind of attuned to that sort of stuff. Like, oh, this is like, not comfortable for this person. And so I think for me, it was like such a gift just to have that opportunity to like listen back to the ways that our conversation unfolded. And, I think there's, like it'd be really cool. I don't know if you've ever seen like a graphic scribe, like do like at a meeting or a keynote talk, like actually like draw out what's happening. It'd be really interesting to do that with some of your episodes, because I feel like it, because you kind of see it from like this other level, and how like the little twists and turns in the conversation kind of take their thing. But more than that, I was like, again, having this like meta level moment of like what, like, I said this thing this way and I think it's fine, but I think I was like, being more diplomatic than maybe I needed to or whatever. And again, I think it's a learned, we want to keep people comfortable. We want to keep ourselves comfortable. And so just this notion of like, diplomacy is great, but also like vulnerability is important too. And so I think that, like towing that line. And so it was just like, and not like a self-judgment, but just more of like oh, I kind of talked around that thing versus just like naming it. And it's like, no, some things are just like, they are just what they are. And you can just kind of be like, that's not a not awesome thing. We'll just put that away, right? Like we don't need to make it a thing, but I should just like name it the not awesome thing that it is. Or alternately, like the awesome thing that it is, and like that impact in my life. So I think for me, it was more listening to that and just having those moments of like, how do we walk in our own truth, right? And like this notion of like the body keeps score. And I in a lot of like my food work, like my food justice work, I read a lot about like generational trauma too, and like how the things that have like our ancestors have experienced like live within us as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to see the ways that we're like, how can we make the other people around us like comfortable dealing with like our stuff?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges that I have sometimes with guests that I don't know personally is that I think so many of us, especially Americans, kind of grew up in this society in which we had to, or we felt that we needed to be performative and we needed to sound a certain way to be credible in some way. So I'm seeing that. But what I'm also seeing more of now in like 2020 plus, like since 2020, is that people are more willing to be a little bit more vulnerable or like, oh, I'm not the only one that's gone through this. And like most of our lives have some sort of trauma in them.
Hmm.
And most of us, hopefully, have learned from that trauma and like, and by doing so and by sharing our story, maybe someone that's currently going through it could learn from that, and see hope and see, all the things we were hiding for 30 plus years as, individuals growing up in the 80s and 90s. It feels very interesting.
And yeah, no, that is interesting. And I think even just this notion of like, even when it's not like a past trauma, just like a current experience, I think we're also socialized to like go through things alone, right? Like, I mean, that is like, I won't talk about capitalism, but capitalism does this. And like, it's really meant, it's a tool to like isolate us from one another. And I think this, like, I was actually just like a couple of hours ago having a conversation with a colleague of mine who, told me she is pregnant, expecting, yay. And she comes from a different cultural background. And she's like, I'm talking to my mom, and she's like, wait, what? Like, you're doing what? Like, you're in a room by yourself? Like, what? Like, after you give birth? Like, that is not okay. Like, like this notion of just like, and I feel like I've had these profound moments, like, just using that as one example of a time when you're like going through something at that moment where I'm like, it is so bananas to think, like, I had a baby, and then you're in the hospital and you're like on a floor with, I mean, I'm here at a big hospital here in Boston, like probably 30 to 50 other people going through like the exact same thing you're going through. Maybe not experiencing it the same way, but probably like having some similar sorts of thoughts, doubts, etc. And yet you're isolated from one another. Like, what a weird concept to think like there were people like literally through the walls of the room I was in, and we were, and I like, I get why, and I also see like the detriment of that, right? Like this lack of kind of communal, this lack of a sense of kind of communal well-being, and what does it mean to be able to sit in our own and other people's like both pain and joy. And I think it's related to kind of what you were talking about, right? So it can happen thinking about the past, but it can also happen in present moments where like we are like literally walls are built between us that keep us from connecting, right? Which is like something we really need as humans. And I think is really cool about the project that you're doing, this podcast. I mean, I think this notion of like you said, like everybody has their own version of this stuff, right? Like everyone has a life shift. Everyone has maybe multiple life shifts. So many people likely go through them alone or just with like the people closest to them. It's like there are whole groups of people out there.
I mean, that was the original goal. Like, who knows what you're doing? Everyone can start a podcast. Anyone can start a podcast. There's millions of podcasts, right? And my original goal was like, I felt so alone going through my grief process as a kid. I wanted one person to hear someone else's story and be, like inspired or feel less alone or whatever that may be. And one of our former students was on the podcast before you, Lauren, and she came on and she talked about her fertility journey and infertility struggles and the things. And she felt so alone in that moment. And this was really the first time that she had shared it publicly. Like, and it could go to, thousands of people, like who knows, like would listen to it. But what I found was interesting in her sense is that by sharing her story, it gave her power. it gave her power back. And she reached out to me a couple months ago and she was like, after we recorded that, I went to HR at my company and asked them to implement this family planning thing for all employees. And now all employees get $20,000 towards family planning, whether that's adoption, treatments, whatever that may be. So the power of telling your story is so,
Huge.
right? Like,
Awesome.
who knows what that can do, whether that's for you or for someone else that doesn't feel so quite, like alone in that, like you said, in that process. It could be current, it could be past. We're all going through it. And what's interesting when you said like we all just went through collective trauma for multiple years and we literally were locked down away from each other.
Right.
Like we had to
Separate.
physically
Yeah.
separate. So it's like, it's very interesting that we were all going through the same thing, but we had to do it alone. And that was like a forced scientific reason we had to be alone, which is really interesting.
And I think we're paying the price of that, right? Like on our souls.
Yeah.
I mean, I see that like, I mean, I feel like just with, even like the college students I'm working with it's like people are qualitatively different. And I think that it is like this, like we were forced to isolate, right? And that goes against our very nature as human beings. We needed to do it. I am not like,
right.
But I think it's the repercussions of that, right, are also a public health issue. And so like, how do we actually think more holistically, right? Which, so many public health people are really thinking about, like, how do we think more holistically about what we even mean by health, keeping each other healthy, like being in kind of community health spaces, so on and so forth. And so I think tending to all of those dimensions is vitally important. And I was like reading a piece today that was like, how has voting changed because of COVID? And it's like, well, yeah, like this many million people died, right? And so like that has just even like a numerical impact on, and so like all of the reverberations of that are so important to attend to. And I think doing that in community is vital, right? And it can be listening to someone else. It can be actually connecting with them. I just think like our shared humanity, right? Like once you lose touch with your shared humanity, it's like a lot can go wrong from there.
It's tough. I hope we get to a space where, we're so focused on physical health, or a lot of people are, and it's just like holistically, we need to think of our health and not, our mental health affects our physical health. And, so these things are important. But speaking of that, like, when your episode came out, I know you shared it with colleagues and things like that. Did you hear from any feedback from anyone or people that were like, oh, I didn't even realize your story?
I like heard from people. I will say like it was funny because you put things up in spaces and you're just like, I don't know, like people, I'm like, it's my birthday, so maybe people are a little bit more likely to be like, but I think the most, so I definitely like did hear from some people that were like, oh, it was like, I listened to this, like I want to listen to some other episodes of the show and, and whatever. But the coolest thing was like the people who I would have never expected to listen to it. Like I was in like a meeting probably like a month later with someone who's like a friend colleague, but not like we don't like hang out or, like, but we work together and I really appreciate her and, but we don't even interact that often. And we were in a meeting with like multiple other people and it was in Zoom and she like private messaged me and she was like, I just wanted to let you know I listened to your episode. And I was like, what? Like, I was like, I feel so privileged and I feel like I want an episode about you now. Like, so I could listen to it and, in turn kind of like learn about you and your perspective and all of that. And so I think for me, so it wasn't anything in particular that she said. I think just this notion of like, wow, you like, for like an hour listen to me ramble on about things that have happened in my life. And I think just shows that desire for people to connect with each other's humanity. And when they have that opportunity to kind of say like, oh, this is, I want to hear what this person has to say. And I feel that way, really about almost everyone that I know, right? Like just to be able
what are
to
the layers?
Them and to do it on your own time too, right? Like it's like, okay,
you don't have to ask the hard questions.
We don't have to do a thing. Like, it's like, I could just kind of do it. So I think that was cool. Like, that's the example that when I was reading the questions before kind of like popped to mind of just this like, wow, you listened to that? That's so shocking to me. And not because like I don't love you, but like just wow, you took the time to do that. And just like what an honor that is even, right? Like that's a gift.
People interested in your story. I think, so much of your story or where we kind of went with it is this idea of the mosaic, right? And the mosaic table. And like, so I'm wondering, like, is it still a table now that we're almost a year from when you recorded, or what, any life updates that are fun and exciting that have changed since?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things I was kind of talking around when we recorded last year was I had been approached about taking on like a second position at the university that I work at, and it's like a fairly like a high profile position. So I'm overseeing the honors program, and so a lot of students are involved with it. Everybody at the university kind of has a hand in it, and I had not yet taken. So if it was April, I had been approached, but I had not yet agreed to take it on. So I was like in this like I don't know. And I think, even in some ways, like having the conversation, even though it wasn't about, we weren't processing that, but I think this notion of like, I mean, I've been working here for almost 10 years. Like, I don't know that this is like the thing that I'm going to want to do forever, but it could be an opportunity to develop some new skills, to have some new challenges, to, learn new things, get to know new people that I wouldn't have otherwise. And so I think that, just seeing that for what it is and then for where it could go, or also being at peace with where it might not go, I think was important. And so I did end up taking that on clearly. And so, I've since July of 2022, I've basically had two jobs leading two teams, one of which I like really built and shaped, and then the other of which I inherited. And so
It's a different
it's
challenge.
been just like a really interesting experience, challenging, and for both like time and bandwidth reasons, but also just like the grappling with like the leadership implications of those different things. So that's been interesting. And I think that what that has spurred is, just this like, what am I doing? What am I about? Like, and I feel like I don't know if it's like an early 40s thing, because I feel like there are like multiple people around my age that are having this moment of like, I think we're about like halfway into like our work or career lives, maybe not quite, but we still have a road in front of us. So it's like, but every year that passes by, like making that pivot, becomes more complicated for different reasons, right? Like, not that it's not possible. And so I think like, bringing up these bigger things of like, what is my purpose? What is my place? So I'm sitting with that. And I think just trying to kind of, see where it goes, and spending some time, trying to take a day off here and there to like just put my head around myself, right? And so I think the convergence of like two jobs, being a mom to a toddler, like transitioning. He also transitioned from like a home daycare situation near our house, which was so wonderful, to like a center here on our campus. So like now my kid's commuting with me, and like, so it's like a lot of those sorts of
Eating
things
donuts.
too. Lots of donuts. You see
Lots
that on
of
his
donuts.
He loves the sprinkle donut. I have to limit him to once per week.
Hey,
Because
one
otherwise
per
he would
week
eat
is
it every
good.
day, which is fine. Like, that's
Yeah.
totally cool. But just like, they probably don't want me sending him hopped up on sugar like every day to school. But yeah, so all of those things have changed. But I think that I had this, I don't know, we'll see if it bears out. I feel like I've said it enough times now that it probably won't. But like, I feel like I've recognized this pattern, at least over the last few years of my life, that the like even numbered years are when like big upheaval and like transitions have happened. So like in 2018, I found out I was pregnant. Like in 2020, like my mom died, and then COVID started, and like everything. This last year in 2022, I like took on their job, and and all of the requisite things that come along with that. But then the odd numbered years have been kind of like where that change kind of manifests into what it's going to be. And so
I like it.
I've probably jinxed it because I've said it enough times now, but I'm hoping like let 2023 be the year, the odd numbered year of like, let's manifest whatever that change is going to result in over the course of this year.
I mean, I think you're right about the 40s. I think so many of us are finally, well, you're a little bit different. I feel like you've always had elements of this, but I think a lot of people in their 40s are finally feeling like it's okay to lean into a purpose, to lean into something that matters to them and not what we were conditioned, you know, to feel like we had to do growing up. I think a lot of us are like that. I think, like I said, I think you're a little bit like you've always had a feeling of reflection. Like you said, you journal and you do all these things.
Nobody really expected much of me, so.
I didn't say that. So, but for me, I just always felt like you always had an idea of what served you most, and that was what you were going to do and kind of move into. Whereas I think it took me a lot longer to get to that point of like, okay, who cares what I'm supposed to do? Whoever said that, whatever that list looked like, who cares about that? Let me lean into the things that matter to me, that I care about, and just, do what's required of me elsewhere, but spend more time doing the things I want to do. So, in interest of time for you, I know you're busy, 2 jobs and all this other stuff. I'm wondering if there's someone that's, interested in maybe sharing their story, but they're a little apprehensive to do so. Is there any advice you could give to someone that might want to share it with a friend or with me on the show? Is there any advice you could give to someone that's kind of on the fence about sharing maybe something that's more vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice is like, do it. Like if it's like something that you're on the fence about or you're thinking about, like the desire is there already, right? And so even if that challenge or that hurdle feels really big, I think doing it anyway is, like that. Again, I mean, I think going back to what we were saying earlier, like I truly believe like that's how we're going to build or rebuild our shared humanity. And I think that both having that opportunity, in one's own practice to reflect, to think, to have it recorded for posterity's sake and like listen back. I think those are really profound questions, and I would probably notice different things now if I went back and listened to the episode. Right. And, I mean, I think that is like, that's a true gift, but I think, putting it out there, like, I think it's like, I tend to do this thing and I've seen it like in shows and stuff before too. So I don't think it's like unique. I'm not like inventing something here. I'm not trying to colonize somebody else's idea, but I mean, I think this idea of like worst case scenario, like what's the worst that could happen? And like, know that like 99.9%, like that's not going to happen. And like, even if that's the worst that could happen, like that's not going to happen. So I think just putting those things out there, you never know who it's going to connect you to, how it's going to connect them, which one of your colleagues is going to take the time to listen to that and like maybe have a different perspective on you. I mean, I think it's always worth the risk, especially when, it's about cultivating our connections to one another.
I've recently, I think 2022 taught me this. Someone yelled at me once, and so I started it. But instead of what's the worst that could happen is what's the best that can happen from it, and trying to lean into that question more. I mean, naturally, I always go to like worst case.
I'm picturing that. I like it though. I like it.
Try it. It's really interesting. But anyway, thank you for coming back and having another conversation with me. I think this was really cool. We veered a little from the questions, but I think we got some valuable stuff that I think the listeners will enjoy and kind of connect with. So thank you for just being you and for being willing to do this again with me.
Well, back at you. And I hope that we'll get the chance to connect and catch up again soon, or at least, I guess, 8 months from now, or however long it's been since we talked last time.
Yeah, well, when I decide that I might come up to New England and visit my family,
Yes, it's just here waiting for you.
I know, I haven't been back in years. But anyway, thank you for listening, Patreon people, and we'll see you on the next bonus episode. For more information, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com.